Morning, everybody. So great to see all of you this morning, isn't it? To see a room full of colleagues to discuss about sustainability. This is very nice. And I want to thank the organizers for putting this panel together. We have a very diverse. We have speakers from multiple faculties on this panel, and we will hear research, community stories, and field notes by colleagues and academics from different disciplines and faculties. So my name is Fangshi Wu. I'm a political scientist with the School of Social Sciences, Faculty of ADA. That's Arts, Design, and Architecture. I'm here to chair this panel. For those of you who have been here for the morning, you think you've heard people speak fast. Now we're going to speak really fast. We've got 7 different projects to share with you, and each of us even have fewer minutes. So you be ready for some fast talking. So without further ado, this panel is about a particular side of the entire broader field of sustainability. Climate change is increasingly on top of policy and political agendas across the board. But on the one hand, we want to highlight climate change and energy transition. But on the other hand, I think my panelists will agree with me that it is only a part of the entire broader field of SDG. So that is my starting point. It's very, very highlighted. It's very broadly sort of communicated through different types of media. But we do want to acknowledge it's only one part of the broader goals of SDG. So to kick off, we have the first project. Let me see if I could put it up. A broader overview of the impact of climate change on citing the potential choices of renewable energy projects, large-scale ones. We tend to think renewable energy is the solution, but on the other hand, we forgot the choices of renewable energy is heavily affected by climate patterns. So we have a project led by Melinda Kay from the School of PV and Renewable Energy, Faculty of Engineering. Melinda herself is not here, but we have the wonderful Abnel, the collaborator teammate, to present. Do you want to stay there? Okay. Okay.
Hello, everyone. My name is Abnel Prasad, and I'm presenting here on behalf of Melinda, who's done some wonderful work related to climate change and energy nexus. So I think the question that we in our group are asking is like, where should we build, solar and wind farms? So, so this is all about, our research connects quite well with SDG goals. So we are working towards climate action and also towards having clean and affordable energy. So the idea is finding the best sites where we can build reasonable, well-functioning solar and wind energy. And you can see from the graph above, the sites of interest that is put forward by the AEMO, the Australian Energy Market Operator. So our goal is to understand what sort of climate risks are posed in these regions, because obviously these sorts of hazards like cyclones would affect the functioning of the solar and hybrid farms. And you can see from this graph the tracks of cyclones that are going through Australia. So one of our major work is related to the changes in wind output to climate change. So what you can see here is the different scenarios of the pathways from the IPCC models. So this is the CMIP models. And what you can see is the changes that you would get in the middle road scenario and the high-end scenarios over Australia. So what you can see is increases in wind energy potential in regions over the northern Australia, whereas you have decreases in the southern Australia. And what you can see on the top is just the wind speed, and at the bottom is the extractable wind power. So the beauty of our project is that we can give these sorts of spatial understanding of where wind potential is greatest. We also look at changes in PV potential. So this is again looking at places where you can put solar farms more feasibly. And what you can see here is the different regions in Australia where you have increases in solar potential over Australia. And that too, when you look at the near future and the far future, you can see that solar potential largely decreases over Australia. So that's a concern. What we have here is the global study from one of our PhD students. And as you go down, this is the sustainability scenario, and these are the high-end scenarios. And what we have mapped here is the global changes in power, PV power, using climate change models. What you can see here is in red is where you have power gains, and in blue is where you have decreases in power. You can see as we go to the higher end, so this is when you have situations, fueled by fossil fuels, you have much less power generated over the globe in most of the regions. So that's quite concerning, and that's something that we can really point out using climate change projections. These are some sites of interest. Some sites of interest which we show the changes in the levelized cost of energy over a period of, like when we compare the near future with the historical. What you can see from here is, for example, this is a plant in, this is Three Georges site, but what you can see here, if you follow the sustainability pathway, we see that there's much less levelized cost of energy, so we have cheaper electricity produced if we choose that path. But if we go to the higher end scenarios towards the up here, you can see that the levelized cost of energy goes up. And this is for different technology as well. Sorry. For monosilicon and thin silicon. So yeah, in a nutshell, what we can do is, using climate change projection data, we can really pick out regions where we could have feasible solar and wind farms. That'd be all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for being so timely. So the key takeaway, keep some of these images in your mind, because we're going to come back to this. The key point is that the location, the choices of these things are very much affected by climate science. Just keep that note, because we're going to come back to mapping and location again. And I do want to challenge the audience now, fast switching your mindset. We're going to talk about switching from the science side of climate change and the energy transition to societies, to governmentalities, to governance. So Professor Elizabeth Serban, your turn, and take us to the next step. Yes.
Thank you. Great. I'll just keep myself honest with my timer here. It's so lovely to be here to see everyone on this really important event. My name's Liz Thurbot, and I'm a political scientist. So that's the lens that I'll be looking at the challenges of the green transition today. And I think it's really important to start by acknowledging the kinds of challenges that our policymakers are facing at the moment, both in Australia, in our region, and around the globe. We kind of have what we call this polycrisis. Become very popular language, but I think it quite helpfully captures this cascade of converging challenges that our policymakers have to deal with. So we've got dangerous climate change on the one hand that is requiring that we really very rapidly scale down our use of fossil fuel energies and also shift away from the kinds of industries, the fossil fueled industries that we've relied on for economic growth for so long. But at the same time as reducing our reliance on fossil fuel industries, we need to create the new green energy industries of the future, from wind and solar to hydrogen to smart grids to big transmission lines to carry this renewable energy. To replace fossil fuel industries as new sources of growth, both domestically, new sources of jobs. We have to accommodate all the changing labour requirements as we scale down the fossil fuel industries. So at the same time as we have to both scale down the industries, build the new industries, we have to do all this in a kind of context of changing geostrategic rivalry. We've got growing great power rivalry between the United States and China, and that's forcing countries, including Australia and across the globe, to really rethink our reliance on global value chains. We've seen all this concern about reshoring, friendshoring, and so this industry building activity is taking place in this really heightened geostrategic context. And so what I've observed as a political scientist with my great collaborators, John Matthews and Son Yong Kim and Hao Tan, we've been looking at how countries in Northeast Asia have been adapting to this kind of multiple security challenges. And we've observed what we see as quite a coherent, well, relative to Australia, a coherent kind of whole of government approach to managing the challenges inherent in the green energy shift. And more recently, we've kind of described this as a kind of green energy statecraft. So what is green energy statecraft? It's really this practice of thinking about the energy transition that has a very particular purpose. And the purpose is to help enhance and build national security, but thinking of security in a really comprehensive way. Not just energy security, not just economic security, but environmental security, of social security, and also military security, and how by promoting a rapid green energy shift, you can really start to think in a joined up way about how you would address those multiple security challenges in one hit. So what does a green energy statecraft kind of look like if we think about it in practical terms? Well, first of all, it is kind of informed by this shift in mindset, this shift in a belief about the purpose of the energy shift and how it can really transform our collective security in terms of energy, economic, environmental security, all in one go. And because it has such a and social security, of course, and because it has such incredible security enhancing potential, there is a belief that the government can and should play a really strategic and ambitious role in speeding up the energy shift and making sure that we reap these multiple benefits from it. And so if we think then about, in the 2 minutes I have left, about how we might kind of think of this joined up energy and economic policy making at the national level? Well, first of all, we have to have a more strategic approach to building and scaling the new renewable industries of the future. It has to be more ambitious, and it has to be focused as much on questions of external competitiveness, so making sure that Australian firms are well positioned to be important players in this global industry, as it is on domestic industry building kind of ambitions. Then there's the externally oriented aspects of this statecraft. So really deeply understanding the needs and challenges facing our economic and energy and geostrategic partners, and how our green energy transition can be designed in such a way as to help our neighbours meet their complex goals as well, their energy security, their environmental security. And I'm thinking here in particular of our Pacific Island neighbours and how our energy shift can really help them meet their very complex security needs as well. And then we have the financial foundations of green energy statecraft. How can we reorient our entire financial system and make sure that finance is serving our green energy goals? Finance has a particular social purpose, and how do we make sure that that our financial sector is pointing in the right direction? And of course, at the heart of all this are the questions of social justice and accountability and sustainability. None of this transition happens without thinking about how we bring how we make sure that the green energy transition is fundamentally transformative in social and economic terms for our regions, for our First Nations communities in particular. Of course, Professor Norman will be talking about this. So what I'm trying to display here, I guess, if we think of in Weberian sociological terms, is like what a kind of ideal type whole-of-nation approach to governing the green energy transition might look like, and how we might think about a mind map for policymakers that helps them think about these multiple security enhancing aspects of the shift and the kind of governance approach that might help us deliver for all Australians and indeed all people around the globe. Thank you so much.
It's impressive to speak about these grand political challenges within 5 minutes. It's very true that energy security is so much broader and so connected with geopolitical, social securities as well. Now I'm very pleased to introduce Professor Heidi Norman, also from Faculty of ADA. Professor Norman's award-winning and highly impactful research have already paved way for all of us to understand better First Nations and the land use and this country. So without further ado, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Feng Shi, for the introduction. It's a real delight to be here speaking with you all today. My name's Heidi Norman and I am with the Indigenous Land and Justice Research Group. My family come from northwestern New South Wales on my mum's side, and I have been at UNSW since the beginning of the year. So it's terrific to be at a bigger event and get to know some colleagues not only in my own faculty but also in other faculties. In this session, and indeed the Sustainable Development Goals, speak to the challenge of climate change. I want to overlay the challenge of climate change with thinking about the impact of climate change on Aboriginal communities. And what an absolutely critical starting point is that there is no experience of disadvantage that climate change won't make worse. In our research, we have been focusing on the Indigenous land estate, the Aboriginal land estate, with a particular focus on New South Wales, to think about how the energy transformation that is necessary in order to address the worst effects of climate change, how this can be organised to present a possibility for Aboriginal landholders. And that really is the simple story. How can this moment of energy transformation and climate change more broadly not present a third or fourth wave of dispossession? So in our work, we have been thinking about some key points, and I'm going to talk to a small research project we have underway. But there are a couple of points to make just by way of kicking us off. Firstly, as I've indicated, the clean energy transformation is a unique and unprecedented moment where First Peoples' rights and interests can be supported or can be advanced by government and industry. So when we think about government, then we think also about Liz's work on statecraft, and industry, perhaps we'll hear about that more from our business colleagues. So Aboriginal involvement is necessary for a number of reasons. And it shouldn't really be the case that we need to be convinced of the necessity, but there are a few really powerful reasons. And one is that the Aboriginal land estate in the bush, in remote areas and in the city extends over 4 million square kilometres. So while the Aboriginal estate is spatially uneven, that is to say, a lot of that land, if you look at the maps, is across northern Australia. It's not insignificant in places like New South Wales. So the Aboriginal land estate gets bigger when it's further away from population centres. Closer to population centres, the Aboriginal land estate gets smaller. And this land estate in the city, bush and more remote places will be significant to achieve Australia's energy transformation. So that's one reason, and it's quite practical, pragmatic and necessary. The other is that as Aboriginal people, we are already on the forefront of climate change. You won't need convincing of this either. In the Torres Strait, for example, rising sea levels threaten your life on country, threatens life on island country. On the north coast, for example, where there have been quite a few extreme flooding events, some communities are already unable to return to their island community. The recent extended drought posed health risks to the majority Aboriginal communities on the upper Barwon and Darling rivers. And climate change modelling, who we have been working with in our research, reveals the impacts into the future that threaten our ability to remain on country. So the critical thing for us to think about is that this represents an existential threat to the very basis of your existence, to connect to country. So just a couple of final points before I move on to talk to you about some of our research. That throughout colonial history, there is a history of exclusion from the industrial economy, save for very small moments of labour force participation, often at differential wage rates. The clean energy revolution or transformation should present the best opportunity we have ever had to participate in the economy, the best opportunity for economic uplift. And we can see this in terms of decentralised energy systems, utility scale projects, and where collective Aboriginal enterprises informed by community ambitions can be realised. Now let's start to look at this in some more tangible ways. What you can see here are two illustrations. On the map of New South Wales shows the renewable energy zones that have been identified in what I'll refer to for shorthand the roadmap. So this is the New South Wales government's plan to transition to bring sufficient renewable energy into the energy mix to meet the 2030 goals. What's significant about the roadmap is that for the first time in the country, the roadmap included provisions that recognised First Peoples' rights and interests. So what was required was the development of First Nations guidelines, and for proponents wanting to build projects within these zones, they had to develop Industry Aboriginal Participation Plan. And this has largely been confined to jobs, Aboriginal jobs, and procurement, Aboriginal business opportunities. Now, what we already know is that this has not been successful, and there's still a lot more work that needs to be done to realise the benefits in the New South Wales Energy Transformation Plan. The employment of Aboriginal people in these projects looks like it's less than 1%, and the business procurement is also very small, very much lower than the population targets. If you consider the renewable energy zone in Western New South Wales, where there's an Aboriginal population of about 14 to 15%, and less than 1% employment of Aboriginal people on these projects is hugely inadequate. So that's one thing, that we already at the very start of this energy transformation, there are risks that Aboriginal people are being left out, right? There are risks, even given the policy levers, that those rights and interests are not being realised. Secondly, Feng Shi, I forgot what time I started, so sorry. Okay. The second point on this slide is that I've been working with the federal government to develop the First Nations Clean Energy Strategy. The strategy will be finalised by the end of the year, and this strategy should also include budget allocation and other resources to make this energy transformation something significant. And what we need in the energy transformation are resources to support the access to clean and reliable energy in remote communities who still are reliant on power cards and diesel generated energy. So that diesel displacement will be a key part of the strategy. The other is ensuring inherent rights are recognised in the energy transformation, and finally, the economic benefits are realised in the energy transformation. Now, I'm going to speak just now for 1 minute to wrap up. What we have been doing in our small little crew is looking at the New South Wales Aboriginal land estate and the energy potential. So you can see in New South Wales, I look at my slide, that even though the New South Wales Aboriginal land estate is small, there is substantial possibility to build projects of renewable potential on the Aboriginal land estate across New South Wales. So you can see the solar and wind potential is, the solar is world class and the wind is sufficient to sustain significant projects. In our research, these slides may not make as much sense, but I at least want to show that going from those statewide maps down to a much smaller scale, and this is a map of Brewarrina local Aboriginal Land Council in northwestern New South Wales, a remote area well outside the renewable energy zones and big population centres. Our research finds they could host a microgrid that could be transformative, an Aboriginal-run microgrid that could be transformative for their town and community, create an income stream, energy security that could be islandable in times of extreme weather events such as floods that they have already experienced. My final slide captures some of the work we've been doing in our travels to places like Dareton and Brewarrina in northwestern and far western New South Wales. And my pitch here today is to ask other experts and students here at UNSW to join us, to get involved, support our research, see what the synergies are with your research to ensure that the energy transformation and our response to climate change delivers real, tangible benefits for Aboriginal people and especially the Aboriginal land estate. Thank you.
Thank you, Heidi, very much for detailed presentation. I want to remind some of our audience, remember the first mapping of geographic, climate-related suitabilities for energy projects. The second mapping offered by Liz, think about governmentality, think about mapping out of institutional infrastructure, availability of good governance. And the third mapping is think about social capacity, autonomy, enabled societal's readiness for energy, for renewable energy projects. Think about how these three kind of intellectual mapping can overlap in reality. So I'm sort of dovetailing what Heidi has started, talking about how societies are ready or not ready, but I'm going to take all of you to a different part of the planet. It's going to be in India, and it's a vast subcontinental country and two different parts of India, but I have to acknowledge it's a teamwork. Two other colleagues from Social Science School started this with me, Dr. Srinjoy Bose and Monica Basodata, and we were very fortunate to find a group of very dedicated researchers based in India helping us to do the survey. We actually started and conducted this research mostly during COVID. So the hard work were done by our India-based researchers. They're very, very devoted, committed, energetic. Originally, the starting point is always humble. We just wanted to know whether community members were informed from day one that there's this new, broad, global, energized field called renewable energy and green energy, and how they responded to it. Were they consulted at all? And if they were part of the public consultation, what did they do? How they participate in the whole processes? Particularly, of course, the ones traditionally have not been fully engaged and consulted in the previous waves of industrialization, commercialization, and marketization. And we're interested in the case of India because it's such a vast country with diverse social contexts, but it's a very good example of the vast developing world. Probably over 70% of this planet still considers themselves developing world. And actually, if you enter developed worlds, quite a significant portion of developing countries, inside those countries, a lot of communities still consider themselves, identify themselves as developing world, right? So we want to understand developing world with diverse social contexts and a democratic system. How are they coping with it? Because the empirical evidence are telling us non-democracies actually are not doing too bad. Sometimes are actually ahead of us in terms of kicking off so-called renewable energy projects. So we have found two sites. One is actually at the foot of the Himalaya mountain range, which is environmentally speaking, highly vulnerable to flooding because of the quick melting of glaciers. And also the eastern part of India, the Jharkhand region, which is traditionally known of mining, and particularly coal mining or superficial thin surface coal mining, and how these communities are coping with large-scale transition into solar and wind energies. Not surprisingly, majority of the people our colleagues in India spoke to have felt something has changed. It just feels different from the memories. The summer feels longer, the winter feels shorter, the summer feels less rainy, and the winter feels less cold. So this is not so surprising. This echoes empirical evidence from across the globe. What is most important slide out of this 5 minutes is we did have qualitative data as well as survey data to confirm some sort of, I was hoping I would be refuted. I was hoping to find something else, but yes, people also told us, village members also told us that not only they felt temperatures change, the flooding and droughts, but their everyday usage of energy, right? Their everyday lifestyle, their everyday practices of cooking has been affected. They have been strongly encouraged or sometimes prevented to directly access woods for just everyday life demands, and they have now much more restricted, limited access to biomass energy sources. They have found more so-called middlemen, businessmen, hanging around, talking to village heads, trying to introduce new energy technologies. They are aware of solar and wind. They've heard rumors of large-scale wind farms and solar farms. But less than 30% of them have ever truly been consulted or participated in any sort of community-level discussions. I think this is the most important thing. If I have a chance, is to bring this to the surface, to share this with my colleagues within the academic world, beyond our own industrial partners, that communities, we shouldn't, or do our best to make sure community members are not the last one to figure out their life is going to be changed permanently, profoundly, and to make sure that they have at least a foundational understanding, and they're not going to be in shock or in fear or feel tremendous amount of uncertainty ahead of them. Instead, they should be equipped with basic users' knowledge, and if they have particularly concerns of land use, potential of being completely relocated, loss of traditions, loss of customary practices, these things should be heard as early as possible. Places like India, as well as Australia and many other developing world, have long history of social resistance. So on the one hand, we're so hopeful, we're so excited about a bright future of green energy, carbon neutrality, dramatic cut of carbon emission. But on the other hand, I would like to call for attention that we don't want social resistance and grievances as a result of that. And without, I hope I'm not ending with a too pessimistic note, I'm hoping, but I'm going to give the floor further to two more presentations, which will take us to the Pacific. And I do think some of the things you will hear in the next 5 minutes will echo some of the concerns here as well. So, Abnel, it's you again, taking us to South Pacific.
Right. I'm again talking about affordable energy to the Pacific Island countries. So I think a nice segue from the previous talk, I think Pacific Islands, these are small islands, they're the most vulnerable to climate change. They have already seeing the adverse effects of extreme weathers. You have global sea level rise, communities being moved around, shift their homes, they're being relocated. So we're already seeing the effects of climate change on these small island countries. One of the things that surprises me is that our current climate change projections from our climate models are too coarse. So they're generally very coarse. They don't really resolve the islands. So how do we make policies if we don't have any sort of robust understanding of what's going to happen to the islands in terms of changing climate? But we do have some good news. There's some high-resolution simulations that was run by the Bureau of Meteorology, which gave us some insights on how the weather and climate would change in the Pacific Islands, and I'll be talking about that in the next slides. So our group, as I said, works on energy and climate change nexus, and this diagram, this infographic basically shows the seventh SDG, which is affordable and clean energy, which is divided into access to energy, renewable energy, and energy efficiency. So we are standing on 3 pillars of energy success here, and that's driven by the SDG goals. But we also know that solar and wind, their costs are coming down rapidly. So we can really increase the penetration of solar and wind in countries such as the small island developing nations in the Pacific. There are remote communities which are still without electricity. And we can look at like how feasible it is for these remote communities to have electricity at their homes. Now this image basically shows the annual change in electricity excess rates in excess deficient countries. And you can see these color in pink, which shows growth which is quite it's falling behind. These countries are falling behind. And if I just zoom into this region here, this is the Pacific. This is where the Pacific Island countries are, and you can see how they are lagging behind in terms of electricity uptake. I'd just like to focus on Fiji. This is again a small island in the Pacific Ocean near the date line, and you can see that the annual excess growth for electricity excess is decreasing. So our research basically focuses on this island. So as I said before, we have these high resolution climate simulations that have been run from the historical period all the way to 2100 under different climate change scenarios. And we can use that information to see how or what the potential of solar and wind resources are in these islands. So these are some of the results that we have got. It's unpublished, but we are still working on it. But what you can see here is this is the solar energy potential. This is in the historical period. The historical period is from 1976 to 2005. So this is how the climate simulations are run. We run it in the historical period. We evaluate it with observations to see how good they are. And what you can see from here is this distribution of fluxes or the energy, the solar potential. And you can see that this is Viti Levu, this is Vanuatu in Fiji, and you have this small island being represented as well. So the beauty of this climate projection data set is that it does resolve some of the major islands, but you can still see that some of the smaller islands, they are still not being resolved. So we still have to run pretty high resolution simulations to understand the dynamics of islands or the flow around islands. But what you can see here is this massive distribution. You have lower distributions in some of the inland areas. Some of the islands have much higher potential for solar generation. Now these two figures are quite interesting as well because we can project, we can run the simulations far ahead in future and see what the changes could be. And what you can see here is the change in the near future. So we look at the difference from 2030 to 2059 mean projections compared to the historical. And you can see in red is gains, and in blue is basically losses, where you expect losses in solar potential. The good news is for the islands, we do see some increases in solar potential, which is good news. But another thing to note is with this increase in solar potential, we also have increase in temperature. And with higher temperatures, the cell efficiency of PV cell efficiency goes down a bit. So we have to factor that component in, and we're still working on that. And this is when we go far ahead in future, so all the way to 2070 to 2099, and we compare it with the historical, you can see again the difference is quite big. We do have increases in solar potential for the island states, which is quite consistent. Moving to wind energy potential. So for wind energy, we obviously have to look at the wind speed. We look at the wind speed at 100 meters. So this is the typical turbine hub heights. We can also have hub heights of 150 meters, so we can extrapolate this data set. But what is interesting here is you can still see the the spatial representation of wind speed. So you have lower wind speed inland areas that are obviously driven by a lot of terrain. Fiji has a lot of high mountains as well. So not all the areas would be feasible for wind farms, but still you can see near the coast, Fiji does have high wind speed, and that would translate to wind energy, good wind energy. When we look at the change in future wind speed, so this is again from 2030 to 2059 compared to the historical. Now you see a bit of differences. You have regions where you have increasing wind speed, and you have regions where there's decrease in wind speed. So obviously we don't want to put wind farms in those regions where the wind speed is decreasing. So this is one of the beauty of these sorts of analysis, where you could in principle come up with interesting sites where you could put in hybrid solar and wind farms. When we go further in the future, up to 2100, you can see this signal enhances. The interesting bit is in western VT level here, where you have strong decrease in wind speeds. So highly not desirable to put wind farms there. But in Vanua level, we have a lot of increases in wind speed. So there's obviously good potential to put wind farm sites at those regions. So some of the planned activities. So one of the things that is missing in the islands is, probably awareness of these kinds of data sets. So these kinds of data sets are needed to make policy relevant decisions. So we're planning to do a workshop in Fiji so that we can talk to the researchers, we can talk to the Ministry of Environment and Energy, and upskill their workers to understand how they can make use of these kind of data set, where they can think about analyzing more data set to build up new solar and wind farms. This could be also used in energy modeling studies around other Pacific Island countries as well. So those are some of the activities that are planned ahead, and very fortunate with the UNSW Australian Human Rights Institute that funded us to do some of this work. Thank you.
Again, for giving such a broader introduction, and we will have a more concrete example in a minute. So we have Professor Korkish, but also COO of a research institute who has already started some in-depth work with some of the communities from the Pacific on renewable energy.
Thank you very much. Actually, I'm no longer COO of anything, but I'm in semi-retirement or on leave going on to retirement. But the project I'm about to tell you about is one that we're still hope to keep very active. So thank you. I'm Richard Korkish from School of Photovoltaic and Renewable Energy Engineering. And this project is much less academic. It's not a research project. We work with undergraduate and postgraduate coursework students to get some hands-on experience. We work in one of the Pacific Islands in the area that Abner was just talking about. We work with the Melanesian people who are the population of that island, that country of Vanuatu, and that island of Tanna where we work. So what we do is we work on small renewable energy systems in remote communities, mainly off-grid communities, from very small projects where we're just putting lights and it's DC lights and phone charging services. So this needs very simple, low-impact equipment, but can make great impact on the very impoverished communities that we work in. We're also interested in water supply, either by solar water pumping or by gravity, and by pumping with ram pumps, which are water-powered pumps, exploring for the potential to use the very abundant heat energy that's in the ground there because there's an active volcano, and also how to transition the small diesel grids away from diesel and onto renewables for the future. So we take students there commonly twice a year, so in the August-September break and in the January break. Groups up to, I think the largest we've had was 15. The group we just had in the last break was 12 students. Had a great time, came back safe and sound. Again, we haven't lost a student yet. The work we did is supported by the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade through its New Colombo Plan project and through donor support through the University of New South Wales Foundation and a few other small sources as well. Vanuatu Community Aid is a group that we work with that we partner with that does most of the on-ground facilitation work for us, so interfacing with the local communities, which we wouldn't be able to do very easily ourselves. Even though I've been going there since 2007, our project is quite well known there, but my language skills are still abysmal, I'm afraid. So we do small projects like these ones. This is just putting the lights in a small health clinic in a village. So that building is covered with tarpaulins because the roof underneath is very rusty and the place is assailed by cyclones very frequently. So this country is the most disaster-prone country in the world. It's hit by cyclones frequently of increasing intensity as a consequence of global warming. It's on the fault lines, so it has earthquakes, it has volcanoes, it has the ash and the acid that comes out of that volcano that drifts across the island, and has potential for tsunamis as well, although usually not realised, thankfully. So the students these days, we build our little distribution boards like you can see here. We build these on campus in the makerspace at UNSW and ship them across, and then we install those little systems when we get there. So that's sort of our bread and butter project. We've got some larger projects too. We also do some slightly larger projects, such as this one. So this is a project at a school. So we're just lighting 2 of the classrooms at the moment, but we're also planning to light another 2 in the near future when they're constructed very soon. So we focus on the secondary school projects, or the secondary schools of the secondary parts of the schools, because those students need to work more at night, and the primary school students just go home at the end of the day and they don't really need the lighting. So this is a project we just finished on the previous visit. This is a water pumping project where we designed and built our own mounting structure from timber, which is a bit unusual. That solar array did survive 2 very big, so Category 4 cyclones, 2 cyclones in 1 week in March last year. So that water pump is not working, but not for any reason that we've got any control over, but the water table has dropped and the well is dry now, but we're looking into what we can do about that. Water pump at another site definitely did work and is still working. So this one there is still working. Oops, sorry. So I have a talk this afternoon, so I'm not going to, a lot of you will probably be here for that as well, so I'll go into more detail about our projects, but just very brief introduction now. But a very hands-on project where the students get dirt under their fingernails, they have a lot of experience, they have a lot of fun together, they have a very intimate and deep exposure and interaction with the local communities with a very, very different culture. And I love doing it, the students enjoy it. It's a potentially life-changing experience for the students. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Richard. Sometimes these images speak more than words. I think we were chatting about how amazing the turnout is. I think particularly this presentation, it shows us not only the researchers and academics are mobilized, it's wonderful to see our students are already in the field. These are hands-on projects. They can see the outcome before they graduate from UNSW. And thank you for sharing the list of potential supporters out there. I see a lot of people taking pictures. Please, colleagues, do take pictures. You need so much different kind of support to make a small project happen. This is not small this is very illustrative, very demonstrative. Thank you for sharing that with all of us. Last but definitely not least, everybody, please welcome Lamont Tom from our Faculty of Business, Australian Graduate School of Management. And he is going to offer another great example. Small is beautiful and can offer wild, applicable experiences.
Thank you, Fengxi, and it's an enviable position to follow such esteemed colleagues as well as between you and lunch. But I'll try and be quick. Today I'll be talking to you about something that is not necessarily part of my role here at UNSW, but there are many AGS alumni and UNSW alumni that are part of Pingala, and I'll tell you a little bit more about what we mean by Pingala, which is a community-led energy transition organization. So who we are is we're a not-for-profit association, and we're community cooperative. And we help community organizations, businesses, and social housing and councils find, develop, and install solar systems. And that these solar systems help benefit the whole community. And we help communities in need that may not be able to normally afford solar, and we help find a community of investors to help finance those projects. So what is community solar? It's a way of financing solar that engages our community, and so that our communities can be a part of the solution and benefit over time from the project. So you've heard a lot of really great talks here today, and we would like to propose that this is one part of a very, one small part that we can help contribute to the solution and a more grassroots perspective. So typically you would have an organization or let's say a social housing project that needs solar. We would then go to or you could go to your community of investors. And these investors don't have to be check sizes of, normally you would say, $10K to $100K. Ours is only $250. We then go through Pingala to actually invest these solar panels, and then the solar that's produced offsets what the organization needs, and then goes back, some of those dividends can go back to the investors. So I think over the last 8 years, our community of investors have had a reliable return of 5%. So if you compare that to putting that in your bank, you're not only helping your community, you're reducing their environmental impact, you're helping save their costs, and you're helping them become a better business. You're also getting a better return on your investment. So in Pingala, community is key, and so we're here to just sort of help just spread awareness of how this might help as part of the solution. So we're open to hundreds of shareholders per project. And so Pingala manages through one entity, so you don't have to worry about any of the paperwork. Unlike other companies, our shareholders are our members, and therefore we maintain a personal connection with the businesses that we fund. So this is sort of an aspect of the circular economy where instead of using your money to invest in shares, the Australian stock market or the global stock market, you can actually actively fund your own local businesses in need. So our community are the shareholders, and Pingala is the first community solar cooperative operational in Australia. And here's some examples of other work that we do, which is social housing. So we believe that every home should be able to benefit from cheap and clean solar energy. But the problem and the reality is that there are hundreds of thousands of families living in social and public housing across New South Wales that don't have access to this. So here are some examples in Roscoe Street in Bondi. This is our latest installation. It's hosted by the Independent Community Living Australia, and we deliver energy security to all the residents here. So this demonstrates that it's possible that you can actually have community solar for even apartments, and that is actually practical. We have another one here in Emo Row, here in Erskineville. Here we've shown that we've installed a small 35 kilowatt solar system that will provide cheap and clean renewable energy again to the residents, which lowers their expenses as well as their carbon emissions. So these are just a few examples here. This was a $350,000 grant just to show that this proof of concept can work here in Australia. It works elsewhere in the US and elsewhere in Europe, and now we're trying to bring this to Australia. For those that want to get involved, we're always looking for volunteers. I myself am a volunteer as well as a board member. Please go to pingala.org.au. And I don't know if it's possible to play this. Oh, there's no video here. We have a video here. If you go to Solar for Everyone, we actually have a panel, a tab for where we have a crowdfunding going on right now for an Indigenous community called Renewable Energy for Brewarina. They've raised about $60,000 out of their $63,000, and there's a small video, just a 1-minute video. I can show it to you in our booth later on about how it's helping these Indigenous communities get access to clean, cheap, and renewable energy. So thank you very much.
It's all from us. There's some calls for more collaborations, there's some solutions and some examples, but now it's time for you to give some feedback, some questions, please. Microphone will be handed out. We already have a hand up. Great.
Okay, hi everybody. Yeah, I hope everyone can hear me. So this question, I'm kind of interested to hear from all the academicians, but specifically Heidi and the Indigenous perspective. So Dutton has recently announced his plan for nuclear energy as part of his vision for the transition towards our emission commitments. And you know, it is kind of pathetic in a lot of ways, but I want to know specifically how it's going to affect the Indigenous community, because I don't think that's a perspective we've really heard from.
Thank you. Before I answer your very interesting question, I need to make the disclaimer that I am actually a historian by training. So probably if we wanted to have a conversation about nuclear energy, we should ask some of our tech friends. But what I will say is that in devising the First Nations clean energy strategy, there were 3 key principles. There are several principles, but I think they can be distilled to 3. One is that clean, reliable energy is a human right. The other is that the energy transformation upholds inherent rights. So those inherent rights would be that, minimise impact on culture and heritage, upholding free, prior and informed consent. So all of these are already in play but not upheld. So the Racial Discrimination Act, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. So those are already, Australia's a signatory to the UN. We might even think about these Sustainable Development Goals. So my inclination is, if we think about human rights, inherent rights, and of course the final point was securing benefits, those tangible benefits which are social, cultural, economic, then energy, I can't see any possibility for nuclear energy in that context. But I think that would be something that the more technically minded academics amongst us But I think if we think about what the principles are, and in devising the First Nations Clean Energy Strategy, we travelled around the country, talked to thousands of blackfellas and industry as well, and it comes down to those three principles. Thank you.
Want to?
Oh, hello. Yes, I mean, Heidi has just given excellent reasons as to why nuclear is fundamentally should be objectionable in the Australian context. But, you know, just even more kind of in practical terms, and, you know, I could recommend that people maybe go and have a look at some of the really great speeches that you can find, I'm sure, on YouTube by Simon Holmes à Court, who, you know, makes it very clear that, you know, from a technical perspective, nuclear, you know, works in some contexts and makes sense in other contexts where it's an already existing technology, but from a purely economic perspective makes absolutely no sense in Australia. So just going beyond the very good reasons that Heidi articulated, if we're thinking about energy and economic security and just the simple cost of energy, then nuclear makes absolutely no sense in Australia, even though it might make sense elsewhere.
Thank you. Thank you both very much. And thank you for the questions. This is a student from the PPE program, and good to see you here. Yes. Do you have a microphone at all? Do we have? Oh, sorry. We have. Sorry about that. I haven't noticed it. So you will be the next one. Okay.
Hi. Thank you so much for the presentations. So my question is about how do you make sure that because a lot of the projects you were mentioning, they involve local communities, indigenous communities, aboriginal communities. So my question is like, how do you make sure that it is not only the outcome when you are like involved in them, but also in the whole process, like since the beginning of the whole projects? Also, Heidi, for the First Nations guideline that you were showing, and I was also wondering in that specific document how their perspective was also involved, or like, yeah, how it was prepared to make sure that they are really involved in the whole process. Thank you.
It was a big question. There are a lot of points in your question. I'm just just trying to think how you started there. So you were talking about how do you ensure like community involvement and consent is maintained on whatever scale of project throughout the life cycle of a project, and that my understanding is that's a really good point, because quite often you'll have different operators coming in at different points, and that is an issue that will arise, say, in Australia and in New South Wales, thinking about free, prior and informed consent. A lot of operators, even in the context of New South Wales, are from outside of Australia, so they'll have no background knowledge of the unique context of Australia, of native title rights, of land rights. So they're on a very steep learning curve. There are ways to achieve that. And I think what I will say is two things. One is universities have a really big role to play in building these good practice guides, monitoring, undertaking research, being involved in projects. Universities are really important places to be monitoring and be involved in what's happening at this absolute, the revolutionary moment in time. And one final point is that the First Nations Clean Energy Strategy, what we are advocating is that it needs funding. So it needs funding for pre-feasibility work, and that pre-feasibility work would allow Aboriginal communities to have to be thinking about their land estate, thinking about what they want to secure from the energy transformation, getting that strategic advice, strategic community thinking and planning in order to then engage with proponents in a way that is equal.
I think, Richard, do you want to?
I'll just add, I think in terms of island communities, there are different ways of dialogues that happens. For example, in Fiji, they have Talanwa sessions. So we sit with community leaders and do a lot of discussions around, how they can learn about climate change and energy uptakes, what they can do to improve their sort of energy usage skills as well. So there's a lot of inbuilt community dialogue that happens. There are also opportunities for things like workshops, as I said in my talk before. There's like workshops from experts who can go to the islands and discuss, important aspects of energy and climate to make them aware of what they need to do in terms of also policy development. So there's it's inbuilt in their cultural systems, the dialogues that can happen. Thanks.
Very, very good question, and we're very conscious of this issue in our project, but we're quite limited by the fact that it's really it's a passion project on the side of not a paid job, and it's a spare time project. But we have done some things along this way. So we've had people who worked with us from the local community who have been engaging with us very closely for more than a decade. And including some very young people with a technical bent who we involve in our projects as well. We have just got some funding from the Faculty of Engineering this time to have 2 students from the Vanuatu Institute of Technology join us on our project, on our visit in January next year, and we hope that we can make that an ongoing activity as well. And we've also had a user guide in local language that's published online, and we've also distributed printed booklets for the local community. And I'll speak a little bit more about that this afternoon as well. So absolutely important, quite challenging because of the low level of education in the community and the low level of numeracy in particular. So when we're talking about how thick should a wire be between a solar panel and a battery, then it needs some maths and it needs some numeracy, and coming from a quite low level of education, but absolutely important issue, and we're doing our best. And as most of the people who are working from universities in developing countries are doing the best they can in the circumstances they're in, I think. But we definitely need to keep this in mind all the time. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Abby has to.
Thank you. I just want to say, it's none of you addressed the issues on a global. I'll just get closer so you can hear me better. It won't make a difference, but you haven't addressed any issues on the global level, right? You've talked about Australia, you've talked about Aborigines, you've talked about local businesses, you've talked about solar panels, but you haven't studied how the whole Earth is going. If you did, I think you would realize how, let me put it bluntly, insignificant all of your actions are. And then the second thing I want to talk about is you mentioned that we don't want social resistance. How can you say this when more than 1,000 scientists at the end of last year, so scientists who study climate change, leader on the IPCC, have called for the public to become activists, have called to do social resistance? How can you say we don't want social resistance? It's basically our only way forward. I'll let you answer this.
Thank you. Well, I didn't say we don't want. I said all these societies and communities have had a long history, an ongoing history of social resistance. I'm saying that it's impossible for us to assume that the social resistance will stop just because we say it's clean energy. What I'm saying is is exactly what you're saying, that this field has been transformed and modified consistently by social forces, including all the examples already presented. Maybe you call them very small, but the field is becoming real because of thousands of small efforts in your eyes. That's the real global, not global by rhetoric. So you have misunderstood what I was trying to say, and there's no way any of these people on the stage has ever said anything, tried to diminish the importance and value from the communities.
I'm not saying this. I'm saying it's insignificant in the impact that it has. You say it's becoming a big issue. We've known about climate change for 50 years. People have written books on in the 70s, which I think I sent you an email about, but you haven't replied, called Limits to Growth, which basically would, like, you see the value behind you, it's called economic growth. If you read this book, Limits to Growth, it shows you why all of your actions are insignificant, even though on the local level, you're doing the right thing. You guys are good people. You guys are doing the right thing. But in the system in which we are, they are misleading. They are just misleading. So that's, first I would like you to respond to my email and then realize that it's not becoming a big issue because we're talking about it. We're not doing anything against it, and we're just pretending to act about it. So,
After you.
So I think it's a really interesting provocation that you're making. Okay? So here are a couple of other points of view. Or not points of view, but some different perspectives. So you were saying climate change has been known about for 50 years. There's a terrific Potawatomi, Aboriginal man from North America, Kyle White. His work is really compelling, and you might enjoy reading it. What he argues is that environmental change is a part of Indigenous worlds, and it's twinned with colonisation, right? So he would say that for Indigenous peoples, you have been this is the dystopia, right? So whereas for a while at least, climate change spoke about this future dystopia. For Indigenous peoples, this is the dystopia. So I think there are some really useful ideas to engage with there. And I think there is a really, another body of work that comes off Kyle's is to think about the impact of climate change and colonisation as experience of dispossession that you are working desperately to avoid the worst experiences of. So that they are some really key points I would urge you to consider. That these local examples are absolutely vital to an effort to sustain your life on your country, to sustain your life, right? To continue to exist. And that's really vital work, right?
I think there's one more speaker who would like to address your question, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think that as scholars, we're all pretty modest about the kind of contribution that we are trying to make to advance a pretty calamitous global situation that we're facing. And I'm not sure if I entirely understand the premise of your question. So, well, maybe it's the way in which it's communicated, which is particularly hard perhaps to hear in this environment, but also I'm not sure that the way in which it's communicated is particularly effective. But what I understand you to be saying is that because we're not talking about the need to degrow and to contest global capitalism, that we are not hitting the mark when it comes to advancing these debates. Is that what you're trying to say?
I do think.
No,
We-
but
we-
in
we
any
do- we
case,
should
what I would, if that is what you're trying to say, then I would suggest that it's quite a simplistic distillation of the key points, which is that absolutely we need to grow the fossil fueled aspect of the economy. We absolutely need to engage in degrowth. But if we are to have any chance of addressing calamitous climate change while mitigating huge social, economic, and environmental catastrophe, then at the same time we need to rapidly grow the green aspect of the economy, which involves rolling out at incredible pace and scale renewable energy technologies. And I think that you'll find that the topic of the panel has been how to do that at pace and scale in ways that are inclusive and that are not going to lead to even greater social and economic harms.
Yes. And we really are only have time. Speaking of inclusiveness, we have to let other people raise questions. And we appreciate your sense of urgency, but everybody here are on your side. Okay?
I've read Limits to Growth. Thank you. I think that we might move on to read it again. Okay,
One more
thank
question from the audience. If not, you do. No? No? Any other thoughts? If not, I think we should conclude here. And it's at Crossfire, certainly. It's good to see some energy, and it's not a standing alone issue. From the presentations, from the dialogue, you can see it's connected to justice, it's connected to equity, it's connected to participation, it's connected to peace, especially sustainable peace, institutional building, trust building. Without these, the transition, the energy transition cannot take off. Without social trust building, without community participation, social autonomy, enabling communities, technology is important, but you need the social and governance part to take off as well. And this is an important dialogue. We don't want to cut it off, but the point is that we're on similar side. Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you.